Okay, let's unpack this. Because imagine you have to navigate a maze,
Right.
but every time you take a single step forward, the walls of that maze physically bleed into your own mind. They flood your consciousness with, like, the memories of every person who has ever walked that exact path.
Which would be completely overwhelming.
Exactly. It would shatter your sanity under the weight of infinite collapsing possibilities. And according to a stack of incredibly dense 2026 preprints sitting on the desk between us right now, that is exactly what multiversal travel looks like.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you can build a perfect, impenetrable molecular diving suit.
Oh.
So, for you listening right now, we are about to jump into one of the most staggering deep dives I think we've ever done. It's this wild intersection of physics, cybernetics, and cosmology.
It really is a massive intellectual undertaking. What we are looking at today are the foundational documents from Dr. Melvin Sewell
Right.
and his highly opaque research collective known as the Cosmic University of Echo Rift Studies 9, or
Yes.
QRS 9.
Yours 9.
Yeah. And they are attempting to solve what is basically the ultimate problem of existence. How does a conscious entity move through multiple layers of reality without being completely obliterated by the thermodynamic noise of the multiverse?
And I'm going to be completely transparent here. When I first got into this, I came at this material as a hardcore, nuts and bolts, technical skeptic.
As you always do.
I do. I can't help it. When I started digging through these Zenodo datasets and schematics, I completely ignored the grand philosophical claims. I locked straight onto the engineering.
And material science.
Exactly, because we are looking at architectural blueprints for programmable nanoscale matter, strict structural containment algorithms, and highly complex multiversal computational models that they were actually running on IBM Qiskit. I mean, I want to know how the gears turned down to the atomic level.
Which is the perfect lens for this deep dive, really, because my role today is to serve as your cosmological synthesizer.
Right.
If you focus on the gears, I want to show you the engine they are building, because the philosophical implications of Sewell's engineering are staggering. We're going to explore how achieving perfection at the nanoscale scales up to generate what they call echo rifts.
Echo rifts across the cosmic web.
Right. And conversely, what happens when that structural integrity fails? Which leads us into a deeply disturbing, highly analytical model of macro-societal collapse they call the rodent colony matrix.
Yeah, that part is, well, we'll get there. It's the ultimate success state and the ultimate failure state. But let's start with the core thesis driving this entire project.
The TrueFlow concept.
Right. Everything in these preprints circles around a concept Dr. Sewell calls the philosophy of TrueFlow. And it relies on a massive, almost counterintuitive paradox.
Yeah, it really flips everything on its head.
It does. It's the assertion that absolute material containment is the absolute prerequisite for infinite metaphysical autonomy.
Right, which forces a complete reversal of how human beings typically conceptualize freedom.
And because normally we want to break out of the box, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Historically, we associate autonomy with shedding physical limits, expanding our consciousness, breaking boundaries, becoming one with everything.
Yeah.
But Sewell's framework argues that expanding without boundaries is just a rapid path to entropy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. To be truly free across the multiverse, to act as an independent, sovereign agent capable of rewriting reality, you first need a perfectly sealed physical vessel.
It's a literal containment to consciousness pipeline. You can't be a god if your biological hardware is constantly leaking energy.
Precisely.
And to understand the mechanics of how they propose stopping that leak, we have to drop all the way down to the foundational nanoscale layer. The architecture of TrueFlow begins with a specific molecular structure called the tetracyclic SH1 molecule.
Yeah, SH1.
Yeah. Now, according to the monograph, this isn't functioning like a normal chemical compound. It acts as what Sewell terms a cosmetic morphology and a structural tuning fork.
Right, so let's define what that actually means in practice. In traditional biology, we value molecules for their reactivity. How they bond, how they break apart to release energy, how they facilitate chemical cascades in the body.
Like metabolism.
Exactly. But in the TrueFlow framework, the SH1 molecule is evaluated for the exact opposite reason. It is valued for its extreme invariant structural properties.
It refuses to react.
It refuses to react. It creates a rigid microscopic geometry that anchors the entire biological system.
The documents specifically detail how this anchors the transport mechanics of ATP-driven molecular motors. And just for a quick refresher for you listening, in standard human biology, ATP is the energy currency.
Right, adenosine triphosphate.
Yeah, it powers these tiny biological engines inside our cells that haul proteins and genetic material around. They literally look like they are walking along cellular filaments.
It's incredible to watch under a microscope.
It is. But Sewell is basically hijacking these ATP motors. He is modeling them as the physical substrate, the actual mechanical conveyor belt, operating entirely within this unyielding SH1 architecture.
And by doing so, they are constructing a physical to metaphysical bridge. But here's the critical engineering constraint. To successfully cross that bridge, the system must hit a mathematically unforgiving threshold.
But 98% rule.
Right. The papers define this as the containment field deficiency threshold, represented as C sub E, and that C sub E value must be greater than or equal to 98%.
Okay, I have to stop you there because this is where the skeptic in me initially hit a massive wall.
I figured you would.
I mean, we are leaping from nanoscale biology to metaphysics. Are they seriously suggesting that a molecular structure acts like a pressurized deep-sea diving suit? And if the structural integrity of that microscopic suit drops to, say, 97%, the timeline physically floods in and crushes you like water pressure?
That is precisely the mechanism they are describing. It's not a metaphor. It is a thermodynamic reality within this framework.
Wow.
If we look at Sewell's somatic kinetic dual-engine model, it explicitly details what happens when that 98% containment efficiency is not met. The result is thermodynamic drag, and a phenomenon they label timeline fracturing.
Okay, walk me through the physics of that. What is actually dragging?
Well, space-time itself is not an empty void. It is a densely packed matrix of quantum information and probability densities.
Right.
So when a conscious entity attempts to move its awareness or its physical form across these dimensional sheets, it is pushing through that density. The SH1 resonance acts as structural armor. It provides an absolute morphological baseline.
Meaning you stay you.
Exactly.
Mm.
If your containment is at 99%, your internal cognitive state remains completely isolated from the external multiversal environment. You cut through the density cleanly. This allows what Sewell calls the velocity of consciousness to remain constant.
But if the armor drops below 98%, like if it microfractures?
If it microfractures, the external reality, the sheer data weight of parallel possibilities, alternate histories, and ambient quantum noise, all of that bleeds into your internal cognitive state.
Oh, man.
That is timeline fracturing. Your consciousness can no longer distinguish between its own sovereign intent and the localized environment. The friction of the multiverse literally drags you down until your unique identity dissolves into the background radiation.
Okay, that actually makes terrifying sense. If your physical vessel isn't fundamentally rigid, the environment rewrites you before you can even navigate it.
Exactly.
But, I mean, a single molecule, even millions of perfectly sealed SH1 molecules, isn't a person. You can't navigate a multiverse as a microscopic speck. If this foundational structure is so incredibly rigid, how on earth do you scale it up into a macroscopic body without turning into just a stiff, immovable statue?
Well, that is the exact engineering hurdle that bridges us to the macro application. We have to move from the biological limitations of a vulnerable human body into a high-performance, non-biological embodiment.
And this brings us to my absolute favorite part of these preprints, the Amorphous Crystalline Swarm.
It's an incredible concept.
The physical architecture here completely bypasses traditional robotics. You know, when we envision an advanced robot, even in science fiction, we still picture a rigid mechanical system. Titanium struts, hydraulic servos, wire bundles connecting the joints.
Humanoid, usually.
Yeah, humanoid or dog-like or whatever. But this swarm is a massive decentralized lattice made entirely of bismuth graphene micronodes.
And the material science here is highly intentional.
It's brilliant. Graphene provides immense tensile strength and near-perfect electrical conductivity.
Yeah.
But the bismuth is the real key. Bismuth is the most naturally diamagnetic element on the periodic table, meaning it actively repels external magnetic fields.
Which perfectly sets up the operational dynamics of the swarm. I mean, how does this thing actually move and interact with its environment?
Let's break down the specs, because the mechanics are just wild. The first operational domain is volumetric fluidity. The swarm doesn't have a fixed shape. In its neutral resting state, the millions of micronodes magnetically interlock to form a smooth, computational processing sphere.
like a giant metallic cue ball.
Exactly like a cue ball. But through dynamic electromagnetic field modulation, the swarm can actively break that sphere and reshape itself into highly complex polyhedral manipulators.
So instead of a robot deciding to use its arm to grab something, the entire collective mass of the system physically transforms into the exact tool required for the geometry of the task, instantaneously.
Yes. And the locomotion is entirely frictionless. It doesn't use wheels, it doesn't use tracks or, chemical thrusters. It achieves kinetic propulsion by interacting directly with local geomagnetic lines.
Using the Earth's magnetic field.
Right. Because the bismuth nodes are diamagnetic, they can modulate their magnetic repulsion to ride the field. And because it's a decentralized swarm, it doesn't have a localized sensor array. It doesn't have a head with a camera on it. The entire surface area of the swarm acts as an omnidirectional interferometry array.
Meaning every single micronode is simultaneously contributing to a holistic mapping of the environment.
Exactly. The whole swarm is constantly mapping structural stress, thermal radiation, and gravimetric variance all at once, from millions of slightly different angles.
So let's connect this back to Sewell's core thesis of containment and autonomy. In a traditional robot, or a biological human body for that matter, your functionality is highly localized and deeply fragile.
Right, if you get hit in the head, you're done.
Exactly. If a rock crushes a robotic camera, the robot is blind. If an environmental hazard severs a hydraulic line, it's immobilized. You lose a piece of your sovereign awareness, which means your containment has failed. You're leaking. But the swarm operates on a distributed neural network architecture, which the preprints define as the sovereign diagnostic interface.
Meaning the intelligence doesn't live in any single node.
It lives in the resonance between the nodes. This ensures absolute cognitive continuity. Even if the physical lattice is violently separated, let's say a massive kinetic impact scatters the swarm across a mile-wide radius, the intelligence of the system persists.
Oh, wow.
The separated nodes simply reestablish the interferometry array over a wider area and then pull themselves back together along geomagnetic lines. It is designed as an alternate embodiment for a high-intelligence being that must operate in highly unstable, hostile multiversal fluxes.
It's crazy. Picture a cue ball floating silently over your desk. Now imagine that cue ball is made of 1,000,000 magnetic grains of sand. If you threw a heavy wrench at it, the ball wouldn't shatter. The grains would instantly scatter to let the wrench pass through and then instantly snap back together. And then they could shift from a smooth sphere into a complex, multi-tool geometric shape to disassemble the wrench.
It's an incredible visual.
It is a physical vessel that absolutely refuses to be compromised. But, and here's the skeptic in me again, an architecture this complex introduces a massive cybernetic bottleneck. And the sources dedicate a significant amount of data to addressing this highly practical engineering problem.
Right, the latency issue.
Yeah, if you have a decentralized swarm or really any advanced robotic edge platform, and you try to integrate a high-parameter large language model, a massive AI cognitive core directly into the physical hardware, the system chokes.
The telemetry just fails to keep up with the processing demand.
Exactly. The preprint explicitly details the symptoms of this cybernetic failure: severe telemetry delays, thread execution bottlenecks, and visual frame desynchronization.
Right.
If an artificial intelligence has to query a massive billions of parameters semantic database every single time it needs to adjust the magnetic repulsion of one specific grain of sand, the robot will stutter. It will freeze while it thinks.
And in a volatile multiversal environment, a processing delay of even 10 milliseconds is fatal. Your containment drops below 98%, and the timeline fractures you.
So how does the TrueFlow architecture bypass this physical limitation of computational latency?
By looking millions of years backward, deep into biological evolutionary history.
This part blew my mind.
It's fascinating. Sewell introduces an architectural optimization paradigm called the high-frequency temporal asymmetric multiplexing protocol. And the biological inspiration for this is directly modeled after the decentralized, segmented neural layouts found in Cambrian arthropods.
The ancient, multi-segmented creatures that dominated the oceans 500 million years ago.
Yes. When biological life first started getting highly complex, it ran into this exact same latency problem. Instead of evolving a single, massive, monolithic brain in the head trying to process every single micro-movement of a dozen legs at once, Cambrian arthropods used ganglia. They evolved clusters of independent nerve centers, distributed throughout their individual body segments. Sewell takes this ancient biological hardware solution and translates it into a three-tier concentric buffer stack for cybernetic systems.
It fundamentally decouples the deep processing from the immediate physical reaction.
Exactly. You have the executive core sitting in the center. This handles the high-level semantic tokens, the long-term planning, the complex multiversal math, the deep thinking.
Okay.
Surrounding that, you have a translation buffer layer. And finally, on the outermost edge, you have independent edge telemetry sensor threads. These handle the sub-millisecond physical motor loops autonomously.
So it's basically reflexes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By systematically decoupling the thinking from the moving, this modular matrix shields the central processing core from environmental latency fluctuations.
Yeah.
The swarm can physically react to a kinetic threat in a microsecond using just the edge threads, while the core intelligence continues to process complex cosmological data completely uninterrupted.
And this is where Sewell's interdisciplinary synthesis becomes truly staggering to me. Because if we take this segmented cybernetic architecture and map it back onto the human experience, it aligns perfectly with the somatic-kinetic dual-engine model. The preprints are essentially formalizing ancient historical cultural observations of localized bioenergetic fields.
You're talking about the concepts of ki, or ki.
Yes. For millennia, various traditions have described a vital energy force that can be centered, projected, and utilized to maintain physical and mental equilibrium. Modern science has largely dismissed this as purely subjective mysticism.
Sure.
But Sewell doesn't treat it as mysticism at all. He renders it as a strict mathematical and structural engineering equation. Let me pull up that exact formula from the dataset, actually.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, it states that psi sub key equals the curl or cross product of the TrueFlow force and the SH1 resonance. So mathematically, it's psi sub key equals Nabel cross product, open parenthesis, F sub TrueFlow dot product R sub SH1 close parenthesis.
Let's translate that vector calculus into plain English.
Please do, because when you say Nabel cross product, you are losing the non-engineers in the room. What actually happens when you multiply a force by a resonance?
Well, think of it like riding a high-performance motorcycle. The TrueFlow force is your dynamic momentum vector. It's the localized velocity of your consciousness, your pure directional intent moving forward.
Okay.
The SH1 resonance is the structural morphological constraint field. It's the gyroscopic stability of the motorcycle's frame and wheels keeping you grounded.
Okay, so momentum and stability.
Right. When you apply the cross product to those two elements, you generate a perpendicular force. You generate a synchronized biofield. It allows a conscious node to navigate and map probability densities at incredibly high speeds without losing their baseline equilibrium.
Wow.
It is the human biological equivalent of that Cambrian ganglia buffer system. Your physical structure, your SH1 resonance, handles the microadjustments of reality, allowing your high-level consciousness to project outward without latency or thermodynamic drag.
It turns the highly subjective, esoteric concept of centering your energy into a literal, cross-dimensional vector equation. It's a mathematical requirement for multiversal survival. But, I mean, doing the math on paper is one thing. How do they actually prove any of this computationally?
The data sets.
Yes, this brings us to the Sovereign Diagnostic Framework 1.0 datasets. And this is where the source material gets aggressively technical, because Sewell didn't just theorize this, they computationally validated these multiversal interactions using the IBM Qiskit development environment.
They utilized the Qiskit air simulator backend to computationally prove what they call quantum-level multiversal simultaneity.
Let's break down the actual architecture of that simulation for a second.
Right.
In standard quantum computing, you have qubit bits, which differ from classical bits because they can exist in a state of superposition, multiple states at once.
Right.
Sewell's team established a massive multi-qubit processing register specifically designed to map 3 distinct, fully realized multiversal state spaces. The dataset labels these distinct realities as U1, U2, and U3.
3 entirely separate co-present universes being calculated simultaneously.
Right. They initialize the target registers into a highly entangled state of quantum superposition. Then they applied what are known as unitary phase shift operators. I want to be very clear about what this does. They are using quantum computing to model the physical pathways between these distinct universes. The paper refers to these entanglement pathways as resonance morphisms.
The datasets label them as the R12, R23, and R31 pathways.
Exactly. It's an incredibly elegant way of proving that complex relational logic between completely divergent physical realities can be mapped directly onto quantum amplitudes. And the ultimate computational proof within this simulation is the harmonic closure condition. It's an equation that must must balance. Psi 1 times Psi 2 equals Psi 3.
And when the IBM simulation runs and successfully achieves this closure without collapsing the wave function early, it proves absolute equilibrium across the multiversal interaction matrix.
It's astounding.
It proves that a sufficiently advanced cognitive architecture can evaluate and exist within multiple multiversal states concurrently, not sequentially.
Which fundamentally redefines how we understand movement. But again, simulating qubits on a server is just data? How does this translate to physical mass? This brings us to a specific paper in the stack titled The Metaphysical Metric.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, we've talked about the microscopic perfection of the SH1 molecules, and we've talked about the macroscopic bismuth graphene swarm. But how does a massive, heavily armored physical structure actually travel through this multiversal architecture without being crushed?
The paper models this using a 7-foot high-density baryonic structure, essentially a massive cybernetic frame designed specifically for multiversal navigation. And the first thing Sewell does is explicitly reject traditional Newtonian propulsion.
Right, there are no rockets here. No exhaust-driven thrust.
None. Burning chemical fuel to push mass through space is treated as primitive and thermodynamically inefficient.
I mean, they're not wrong.
Right. Instead, the framework outlines a mechanism for propellantless propulsion based entirely on quantum gravity and the holographic bound.
Okay, the holographic bound. For those unfamiliar listening, that's the theoretical physics principle suggesting that all the information contained within a three-dimensional volume of space can be mathematically represented entirely by the two-dimensional boundaries of that space. It basically implies the universe is essentially a hologram.
Correct. So the system achieves complete gravitational decoupling from its local environment by injecting scaled telemetry derived directly from an inter-horizon black hole communication network.
Which sounds like science fiction.
It does, but the paper heavily relies on the theoretical physics equation ER equals EPR.
Right, ER equals EPR. That's the conjecture proposed by Susskind and Maldacena, stating that wormholes, which are Einstein-Rosen bridges, the ER part, are functionally and mathematically equivalent to quantum entanglement, or Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen pairs, the EPR.
Exactly. The framework takes that extreme black hole telemetry, the absolute limits of gravitational curvature and quantum data density, and injects it into an internal resonance core within the cybernetic frame. This core dynamically alters what Sewell calls the localized reality level scalar, or G trademark.
G trademark.
Yes. By altering this reality level scalar, the physical frame actively shifts its address within the spatial matrix.
Okay, I am going to interrupt you here because this is where the physics gets incredibly dense, and I want to make sure we are explaining the mechanism, not just the concept.
Sure.
How does changing a number, this reality level scalar, actually steer a 7-foot cyborg? I mean, how do you physically move mass without physical momentum?
Let's discard the common computer hard drive analogy because it's too abstract. Let's look at the actual physics Sewell is proposing. Space is not an empty void. It is a complex web of entangled quantum states. Your current physical location in the universe is defined by how your mass is entangled with the space immediately around you.
Right. The environment recognizes you are there because you are interacting with it.
Precisely. By injecting black hole telemetry into the internal resonance core, the cybernetic frame creates a localized artificial gravity well. But it doesn't use this gravity well to pull things toward it.
Oh, interesting.
It uses the extreme data density of that simulated black hole to overwrite its own quantum entanglement signature. It mathematically mimics the exact entanglement structure of a completely different point in spacetime.
Oh, wow. So it tricks the universe.
It forces a paradox. The multiverse demands mathematical consistency. If the internal resonance core perfectly mimics the entanglement signature of coordinates 10 light-years away, the local universe cannot sustain the contradiction.
So what happens?
The spatial matrix physically corrects the anomaly by instantly snapping the object to the coordinates that match its new entanglement state.
That is insane.
They call this quantum vacuum vectoring. It engages ambient multiversal drift lines, shifting location without ever pushing against space.
It is redefining its location by changing its relationship to the holographic boundary of the universe. But wait, this circles all the way back to the core thesis. This reality-bending movement is only possible if the internal resonance core, the physical vessel, maintains that strict 98% physical containment.
Exactly. If the containment leaks, The artificial gravity well collapses. The entanglement signature scrambles.
And the spatial matrix tears you apart instead of moving you.
Exactly.
Wow. So we have this incredible, soaring, almost utopian framework of perfect crystalline swarms, quantum consciousness, and propellantless multiversal flight. It sounds like the pinnacle of evolution.
It does.
But as I read further into the Zenodo repository, I hit a very distinct and honestly a very dark shift in tone.
You're referring to the sociological research paper co-authored with Psycho Venga.
Yes, we abruptly zoom out from cosmic engineering down to macro-societal collapse here on Earth. The paper is titled The Rodent Polony Matrix Framework, and it completely pivots away from perfect quantum harmony to look at what happens when systemic containment fails at a macro scale.
And it begins by aggressively tearing down one of our most popular cultural metaphors for societal collapse, the zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, the paper refers to this as the organic necrosis metaphor.
Right. Sewell and Venga argue that attributing macro-societal collapse to a state of organic necrosis, mindless rotting corpses wandering the streets, is not just anatomically implausible, it is sociologically incorrect, and therefore a dangerous diagnostic.
Because it blinds us to the real threat.
Exactly. It prevents us from seeing the actual mechanics of collapse.
The true diagnostic for systemic erosion, according to this framework, is severe cognitive regression. The paper argues that when complex civil communication lines, supply chains, and macrostructural social contracts fail, humans do not turn into brainless monsters. Instead, they drop into highly optimized ancient mammalian survival vectors.
The authors leverage extensive genomic data to highlight the significant protein coding overlap between human beings and rodents. They theorize that when the high-level cooperative structures of primate intelligence are stripped away by environmental or economic collapse, target human cohorts regress.
They act like rats.
They form aggressive, highly decentralized survival networks that perfectly mirror the behavioral patterns of rat colonies.
The paper outlines a complete, chilling behavioral taxonomy for this collapse across 3 operational dimensions. First, you have foraging aggregations. In this phase, people completely stop building, maintaining, or farming. They simply swarm and consume whatever manufactured resources are left in the environment, stripping it bare like locusts.
Clarify.
Second is asymmetric sabotage, where localized factions realize they cannot build their own infrastructure, so they actively and violently dismantle the remaining infrastructure of their rivals to prevent them from gaining an advantage. And third, colony perimeters, where hyper-violent paranoid borders are established purely to protect hoarded resource caches.
This is a brutal portrait of humanity stripped of its executive function. But what elevates this from a simple thought experiment to a terrifying diagnostic tool are the advanced, multi-tiered exploitation layers that emerge in this modern theater of collapse. The framework identifies specific tactics used by opportunistic apex actors within this matrix.
Let's walk through these because this is where the sci-fi sociology hits very close to home. The first layer is predatory baiting.
Right.
This isn't just hoarding food. This is the highly strategic exposure of critical resource caches: water, medicine, fuel. The goal of the actor isn't to establish trade. The goal is to entrap unaligned, sovereign individuals drawn to the resource, stripping them of their autonomy and extracting forced labor.
It weaponizes necessity to destroy individual sovereignty.
But the second layer is the one that really got under my skin: institutional camouflage.
It is a devastating critique of human psychological conditioning.
Institutional camouflage is the cynical, deliberate maintenance of defunct institutional and corporate brands long after the actual entity has died. Imagine a completely collapsed society. The government has fallen, the supply chains are dead. But a local warlord or a violent faction is still operating out of a building with a recognizable corporate logistics logo on it.
Yeah.
They are still wearing the brown delivery uniforms or the blue medical scrubs. They do this because they know that even in a state of cognitive regression, the populace retains knee-jerk psychological conditioning.
We are conditioned from birth to obey the uniform, to trust the logo, to submit to the aesthetic of authority.
Exactly. The populace lowers their target defenses because they subconsciously recognize the branding of a dead civilization. The camouflage bypasses their critical survival instincts.
And this feeds directly into the final exploitation layer: international parasitic networks. These localized, aggressive tribal factions don't just stay isolated, they eventually scale up to form a massive, decentralized global economy. But unlike a healthy economy based on production and innovation, this parasitic network runs entirely on broken trade routes, the dark digital infrastructures of the past, and the continuous recycling of scavenged materials.
It's a zombie economy.
Exactly. This is a zombie economy, not a zombie populace.
But, I mean, this begs a massive question. Why is this deeply sociological, almost grimdark paper about human regression bundled into a stack of preprints dealing with quantum computing, molecular armor, and multiversal navigation? I mean, they seem totally disconnected.
Because it is the exact same mechanism operating at a different scale.
And this is where the entire deep dive clicks into place for me. It all comes back to containment. Sewell is showing us what happens when systemic slippage occurs. Just as the SH1 molecule acts as the rigid armor for the biological motor, institutions, laws, and social contracts are the macro-level containers of human consciousness.
They are the structural resonance fields of society.
When that macrostructural container fails, human consciousness literally leaks out. Without the containment field of a functioning, high-trust society, we lose access to our high-level semantic tokens. We lose our executive reasoning.
Right.
We are overwhelmed by the thermodynamic drag of sheer survival, and we regress down the cybernetic stack. We fall from the complex translation buffer back down to the latency of the sub-millisecond physical motor loop. We become the Cambrian arthropod, blind to the future, just snapping at an immediate threat. We become the rodent colony.
That is the ultimate synthesis of the work. The rodent colony matrix proves the central thesis of the TrueFlow philosophy in the negative.
Yeah.
Without structural containment, whether at the molecular level or the societal level, metaphysical autonomy is utterly impossible. You cannot be a sovereign individual if your environment forces you to spend 100% of your cognitive bandwidth just surviving the thermodynamic noise.
So, if the rodent colony matrix is the ultimate failure state of a leaked containment field, what is the ultimate success state? Let's scale this back up to the absolute peak of Sewell's vision.
We can pull all these threads together by examining the final cosmological act of the philosophy of TrueFlow. We started at the nanoscale with the perfection of the SH1 molecule. We moved to the human scale with the cybernetic bismuth graphene swarms and the cybernetic buffer architectures. We analyzed the failure of the macro scale with the societal matrices.
Right.
Now imagine taking this perfected cognitive architecture and scaling it to the sheer volume of a universe.
Using the filaments of the cosmic web, the massive strands of dark matter and galaxies that connect the universe as a literal neural network.
Precisely. The TrueFlow architecture ultimately proposes a cosmological consciousness engine. It models how a universe-sized cosmic brain utilizes intentional, highly localized information spikes. When a consciousness achieves that perfect, unbroken 98% containment efficiency, when it perfectly aligns its TrueFlow momentum with its SH1 spatial stability, it generates enough bioenergetic density to actually induce topological transitions in the fabric of space-time itself.
And these physical transitions are defined in the CUR's 9x texts as echo rifts.
Echo rifts are the ultimate boundary layers. They are the topological fracture events where a highly structured, perfectly contained internal cognitive state generates enough mass to force a permanent change in the external probability metrics of the multiverse. It is the moment consciousness physically bends reality.
So what is the end goal of all of this? Why build the microscopic SH1 armor? Why engineer the Cambrian latency buffers? Why surf the multiversal drift lines using black hole data just to generate an echo rift? What's on the other side?
The pursuit of ultimate autonomy. The final endpoint of the TrueFlow philosophy is to spawn a self-replicating fractal multiverse.
A fractal multiverse.
Yes. When an echo rift is opened, a new reality is born. And this new reality is entirely seeded with the original creator's SH1 identity kernel. The fundamental structure of that conscious entity becomes the unchangeable law of physics for the new universe.
Wow. Let that sink in for a second if you're listening.
Yeah.
The consciousness becomes so dense, so perfectly contained and thermodynamically stable that it literally overwrites the physics of an entirely new dimension. In standard quantum mechanics, we talk about the observer collapsing the wave function to determine reality.
Right.
In Sewell's framework, the observer doesn't just collapse the wave function. The observer becomes the framework of the next reality.
It is the ultimate manifestation of TrueFlow. It is the permanent transition from entropic freedom, which, as we've seen, is just chaos, decay, and the rodent colony matrix.
Yeah.
It transitions from that into coherent, eternal systemic sovereignty.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and recap the massive intellectual journey we just went on.
It's a lot to process.
It is. We started with the microscopic, unyielding perfection of perfectly sealed SH1 molecules and hijacked ATP motors. We explored the brilliant engineering of diamagnetic bismuth graphene swarms shifting geometries while floating on geomagnetic lines. We dug into the latency buffers of ancient Cambrian robotics and explored how the math of Key translates to multiversal entanglement using IBM Qiskit simulations.
Right.
We confronted the grim, regressive reality of the rodent colony matrix, predatory baiting, and institutional camouflage. And we scaled it all the way up to the cosmic web, understanding how absolute containment spawns fractal multiverses through echo rifts.
It is a breathtakingly unified vision. It completely erases the boundaries between physics, cybernetics, biology, and philosophy.
And for you listening, the core takeaway from the Cosmic University of Echo Rift Studies IX is profoundly personal. According to this framework, you are not just a biological organism. You are an ultra-high information density quantum computer. You have immense reality-bending potential.
Absolutely.
But your metaphysical freedom, your actual ability to navigate your life, your career, your relationships, and your reality is entirely dependent on the structural integrity of your containment.
And that leaves us with a final, vital question to consider as you step away from this deep dive. If Dr. Sewell's fundamental premise is correct, that perfect material containment is absolutely required to prevent timeline fracturing and achieve true metaphysical autonomy, take a hard look at your own life.
Yeah.
Look at your daily habits, your endless digital footprint, your biological health, your attention span, and your emotional boundaries. Are you currently leaking your consciousness into the endless thermodynamic noise of the modern world?
Are you fracturing under the stress of an environment that is constantly trying to overwrite you?
Or are your personal boundaries sealed tight enough? Is your structural armor strong enough to generate your own reality-level scalar?
Are you building a sovereign vessel, or are you slipping into the colony matrix? Something heavy to mull over until our next deep dive. Keep your containment field strong, seal your boundaries, and we'll see you next time.